Welcome to Ballot Battleground Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Marjat, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. We're less than 3 weeks out from primary election day in Nevada, but the majority of people will vote well before then. Ballots are arriving in mailboxes now, and early voting starts on Saturday. That's why this week's guest comes at a perfect time. Nevada Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar joins the pod to talk when and how to vote, how to change your voter registration, and how to register for the first time if you haven't already. Plus, how does his office receive voter fraud complaints? How many did they get last election, and how are they handled? A great conversation about the small fraction of election violation reports and what investigators in his office do to figure out if there was in fact criminal intent or if it was just a misunderstanding. One quick reminder before that interview, my station News 4 Fox 11 launched a comprehensive effort to cover primary races like we never have before. It's called Know Your Candidates 2024. We interviewed over 60 candidates for races like U.S. Senate, Nevada Legislature, Reno and Sparks City Councils, the Washoe County Commission, and Carson City Mayor. We don't have time to bring you all those interviews on this podcast, but if you're a Northern Nevada voter, we think you'll learn something and learn more about the candidates by checking it out. We'll drop a link to the Know Your Candidates 2024 page in the show notes. Now, without further ado, our discussion with Secretary Aguilar. And I'm so pleased to be joined now by Nevada Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar, making his second appearance here on Ballot Battleground Nevada. Thank you so much for coming in, Cisco. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben, for having me. It's always exciting to be here.
Yeah, we had you in person for a pilot episode that didn't air. We had you virtually, but first time in person for a real live taping of Ballot Battleground Nevada, which is great to have you, even though you went to U of A. And I think the last time we had you on, it was March Madness time. You predicted a deep run, but death taxes and U of A Wildcats failing in March and dropping out early.
I was so hoping for that Pac Wildcat matchup, but neither team's made it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, U of A, I think, made it to the Sweet 16 in Nevada, the early exit after blowing that huge lead. So it didn't end well for either team. But that's not the reason we're here today. We're here to talk about Nevada's elections. And for folks who might not know, the Secretary of State is, of course, Nevada's top election officer, in addition to business licensing and all the other responsibilities. But for this podcast, we're talking elections. Early voting starts on Saturday. Ballots are arriving in people's mailboxes already. Where are things at with your office? Because we are right in the thick of it now.
We are engaged. We are out there. We are managing. We are discussing. We are planning. And also, too, being there to support our 17 clerks throughout the state to make sure they have the resources and the ability to do the job that they do.
Yeah. Election day, of course, June 11th. But if previous elections are any indication, the overwhelming majority of people are going to vote well before then by mail or by early voting. Let's just go right to the basics here for someone who's maybe voting for the first time. They just turned 18 or just moved to the state. I mean, how many different ways can you vote in Nevada? What are the best and easiest ways to cast your ballot?
Well, I think before we even start talking about casting the ballot, let's talk about voter registration.
Yeah.
And understanding that Nevada is a same-day registration state, so you can walk up to your polling location, register to vote, and cast your ballot. That's important for people to know. There is no delay in being able to file. You just walk up and decide that you want to vote.
Yeah, and you can also, since Nevada is a closed primary system, are you able to change your party affiliation on the same day as well?
Absolutely, and the largest group of registered voters in Nevada are nonpartisan. So if they decide they want to participate in a primary political race, they can. They can walk up to their polling location and say, I want to participate in either major party's primary.
Yeah, because some people do get caught off guard. You're seeing all the ads from all the different Republican and Democratic candidates, and they're looking forward to voting for or, potentially against some candidates, and they get their ballot, and it's like a city council race.
Correct.
And a school board race, and it's pretty limited. So, again, real basic here, Nevada closed primary system. If you're a registered Republican, you can vote in those Republican primaries, but a third of our voters now, nonpartisan, cannot vote in Republican or Democratic primaries. So unfortunately, their ballots are a little bit shorter.
Right.
So, but you can change your affiliation on day of.
That is correct.
Okay.
Or you can do it at any time. You can
Yeah.
sign on to your county website, re-register as with a major political party, participate in that primary, and change back to a nonpartisan.
Change it back right after, and a lot of people do that. I think we noticed that after the presidential preference primary, when we track those voter registration trends. How many people have voted already? Because you can get your ballot in the mail. You could go and physically drop it in right away. Plus, there's military and overseas voters that can vote early. So people are already voting.
As of last night, we've received about 2,000 ballots.
Wow.
Mail ballots. Yeah. So it's pretty exciting to see people get engaged.
What can the clerks and registrars do with those ballots legally at this point? Because they cannot count or tabulate them, but some of the legwork on the front end can be done, right?
Obviously, security is a big point. And so making sure that the chain of custody is established, the security of those ballots is established so that when they can start processing, they're ready to go.
Well, we are in the thick of it for this election season. One thing I did want to ask you, we did a story yesterday on an error in Washoe County here where people who had chosen to opt out of receiving a mail ballot, there was maybe a clerical mistake on the county registrars and people still got their ballot in the mail. Was that error limited to Washoe County? Was that affecting other counties?
No, that's solely a Washoe issue. And I think, again, it goes back to making sure that our clerks have the most up-to-date tools to be able to do their jobs. Washoe County's operating off of a legacy system called DIMS, which, they're struggling to support. But with the new VRAM system, you won't see this issue occur because they will have state-of-the-art technology. They will be up-to-date. There will be vendor support for this system to ensure that we're doing what's in the best interest of Nevada voters.
Yeah. And VREMS, for folks who might not know, spell out the acronym for us.
VREMS is Voter Registration Election Management System. We are implementing the top-down voter registration system. Right now, all 17 counties manage their individual system on some older systems like we are seeing happen with the DIMS system in Washoe County. This will unify everybody, bring us together, and make sure that we're in sync on what we're doing.
And to restate for folks out there, that means that your office, the Secretary of State, will oversee and have the main voter registration file, the huge list for the entire state of every single registered voter.
We will have one single unified voter registration system to ensure that all the data is accurate and that we also, too, can deal with duplicates. We can deal with Nevadans moving from county to county to ensure that Nevadans are getting the proper ballot that they deserve.
The original plan was to implement that prior to the June primary.
Correct.
What happened to cause that process to be delayed until after the June primary, and what's the latest on that?
I think it's important for Nevadans to understand that our election system is pretty decentralized, right? The state has certain responsibilities, oversight, but the clerks, the 17 counties, have a lot of responsibility and obligations to run those elections. They're responsible for the tabulation. They're responsible for the execution of the election. They are responsible for the processing of mail ballots. And so those duties and responsibilities are pretty significant. And also, too, it's like when you work at a bank, you try to delegate duties to divide the responsibility to ensure that the security and the chain of custody is always maintained.
Is it still the plan to implement that in July as soon as the June primary is
back
wrapped
to my
up?
point of the reason why it was delayed is the significant responsibilities of a clerk. They all came together collectively and said, hey, we have a huge election coming up. We all understand it. They understand the value of the system. They just wanted more time to be able to learn the system and to ensure the system was really addressing some of their needs. I was confident that the system would be able to work for the primary election, but I respect their opinion because, again, they're the ones on the ground running these elections. And if they say they want extra time and they collectively come and say it, you obviously have to listen to the individual doing the work.
And then once the dust settles from the June primary, is it, it's July 1st?
Go time.
Okay.
Go time. And we're working with it now. We just did a mock election. We'll do a few more. And we'll actually do a public mock election so people, the press and everybody else can see how this system is functioning, what it actually does, and what the benefit is to not only the state, but the clerks in doing their job from an efficiency standpoint.
Going back a little bit to the people that receive their mail ballots mistakenly when they've opted out, what's the best way in this climate when people are worried about extra ballots floating out there unnecessarily? What's the best way to dispose of that?
Well, I think it's important to know that every ballot has a unique identifier. So if that ballot is voted, it'll be cast, it'll be counted, and if somebody tries to vote at a live polling location, they'll be immediately notified that the ballot's already been processed and it's been accepted. If people are concerned, they can bring those ballots to the Washoe County Elections Office and surrender it, or they can destroy it themselves. But know that every ballot has a unique identifier and it can be tracked so that there isn't an instance of a double vote.
And the double voting is a great segue. You led us right into our section. The main reason that we wanted to bring you in for this episode a little while back was your office released a quarterly report on investigations into election complaints. We hope to get you in here back in April, but you were at the White House. Before we get into election complaints, what took you to the White House, and why is that more important than Battleground Nevada?
Well, I think it's looking at what, sport. I come from the sports world, right? And understanding the value of sport and that it builds community, it brings people together. And to see the Las Vegas Aces be honored for what they've been able to accomplish during their time in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a proud moment for Nevada to know back-to-back champions had the opportunity to represent our state, but also, too, they're important community partners. They understand the value of access to the ballot box. They understand the political process, and they understand what it means to get people engaged. So I was proud to be there to see them do what they're doing, and we're in conversations with the team about talking about access to the ballot box and making sure that poll workers know they are supported. Because I think if an athlete or a community member stands up and says, hey, this person's an important individual, we need to recognize the work they do, people are going to listen. And I think sports athletes and figures and teams could have a good, engaging responsibility when it comes to protecting our poll workers.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there some kind of role where, Nevada professional athletes are helping to get out the vote in June and November?
Those are conversations we're having. We're having those conversations with the NFL, with the NBA. Obviously, we love the fact that we have the national champions here to be able to help drive that message.
Were you able to meet the president? What was the
No, I
extent of
did not. I did have the opportunity to speak with Nikki, the president, and Becky, the coach, and some of the players. So that was a really engaging moment to be able to be there and support them, especially when we talk about women's sports. Women's sports are with Caitlin Clark. You saw the women's Final Four reach record numbers, and it's always great to see that parity to climb. And also, too, when you talk about name, image, and likeness and the way college sports are changing, this is all important to that process.
Absolutely, and that's a future episode of the Nevada Sportsnet podcast, which you've also been on prior. But okay, we'll circle back to election investigations. So you guys in the past, or you guys now, are starting to release a quarterly report detailing all the complaints that come in from various people alleging something nefarious happening in our elections. So let's start from a place of, your office hadn't released that before, or previous administrations. How come you wanted to start releasing that? And what did we find out? What did we learn?
Looking at what happened in the 2020 election, 2022, members of the community had filed election integrity violation reports. And they never knew where those reports went, what happened to them. Were they in a box? Were they in a file? And I thought, I continued to hear this over and over as I'm out in the community talking with voters. And we went to the legislature and said, we really need to respond to Nevada citizens on these issues. And unfortunately, we're lacking in capacity of staff. We need to build that capacity to be able to respond to these, to deal with them. And we were able to, the legislature gave us 2 civil investigators, 1 criminal, to deal specifically with this issue. And now that we have those team members, we have that capacity to look at them and be able to respond. One thing is responsiveness, right? Because an investigation is only as good as the evidence. And if we're waiting long periods of time to do the investigation, a lot of that information goes away. Yeah. And so we need to be as real time as possible to ensure the evidence it's alive, it's well, and we have access to it.
Of course, you guys have investigated these reports and these complaints all along, but the first time it's been kind of compiled into this quarterly report, which we'll put in the show notes because it's on your website, I believe. We'll start with, how do you guys
it's also too important to know that majority of these reports and these filings sometimes are just a lack of understanding of the law.
Yeah.
So really what this opportunity is for us is to educate Nevada voters on the law and when a violation exists and when a violation does not exist. And so it's our opportunity, it's part of our voter engagement, it's part of our voter education to ensure that Nevada voters know what is a violation and what is not a violation. Unfortunately, there are people with not good intentions, and so sometimes they use this process to overwhelm our office, to distract us from the real work we need to be doing, and we also need to address that as well.
How do you guys get complaints, and what are some common examples of maybe those more innocuous ones where it's just an understanding or a mistake?
They vary from everything from somebody alleging a double vote. It's somebody alleging that a candidate violated the election law by doing X, Y, or Z. Those are some of the things, or if there's something that we have not addressed, they want to bring it to our attention. If they feel an irregularity at a polling location, if they were an observer in the election center watching the ballots be processed, they feel there was a violation, they will bring it to our attention. The great thing about it is the team we have built is extremely responsive. So as soon as they receive one of these reports, that filer gets an immediate notification that the report was received. And then they'll go work through the process. And sometimes the other thing we're finding is a lot of these reports, the filer does not wish to engage in the investigation process. And if they're not willing to engage, there's limited evidence for us to have, because we can't operate off of hearsay. We have a legal standard that we also have to meet. And if the person's not willing to engage, we can't take the investigation as far as it needs to go.
How long does it take to investigate these? I imagine it varies by the case.
Yes.
And what happens once your team in your office has sent it out for possible prosecution?
Well, it's the gathering of the evidence. It's putting the evidence together, putting the report together, understanding when it's a civil issue or crosses a line to become a criminal issue. And when it crosses that line to criminal, then we have to prepare the case and refer it to the Attorney General's office for review, and they decide whether or not to prosecute. The other portion of this is starting to engage the district attorneys in each of the 17 counties to say, hey, this potential violation occurred in your county. Do you want to, here's all the evidence, here's the case file. It's up to you to prosecute this issue.
So let's walk through it a little bit. The report recaps investigations from both the 2022 election as well as the presidential preference primary from earlier this year back in February. The double vote investigations kind of stand out. That's when someone mistakenly or on purpose tries to vote twice, which is a felony. It's illegal in Nevada. There were 146 double vote investigations. That doesn't mean it happened, but there was an investigation launched. And I think you guys put the stat here. That represents 0.0001% of the 1 million plus ballots cast in the 2022 general election.
That is true. Again, I go back to the statement I make all the time. Nevada runs some of the most safe, secure, and accessible elections in the country. There is no widespread voter fraud. And when people talk about it and you start to put it in whole numbers, you really start to see the whole picture. That our clerks are doing a great job. They are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The system works the way it's supposed to work. There are checks and balances throughout the entire system. We talked about earlier how the decentralized system works, and it's intentional to divide responsibilities to ensure there is no commandeering power over one of the processes. We're operating in a transparent world. We're trying to operate in real time so that voters can have confidence and be proud of the system that Nevada runs.
And just running through these numbers again, 146 total reports. Of those, only 47 were referred for further investigation with state police or with prosecution. 29 of those were criminal investigations, but were closed by your office with no action. A handful of those 26 are still open. 29 of them were closed with no action. And in 15 of those cases have been closed with a civil notice. Is that a slap on the wrist for someone who did something unintentionally, or?
It is. And also too, it's building a record, right? If this person's going to continue to be a bad actor and that history is documented, the next time it occurs or this person chooses to violate the law, we will have a stronger basis for going after even stronger. And I think sometimes it's recognizing the issues that come up in double votes, right? It's a father and a son with very similar names. They have a different middle initial. You know, my family, my grandfather, my father, and my brother all have the same name. And sometimes, you know, you have families that live together and one individual may go to the polling location, actually vote in person. The other individual will use a mail ballot and grab the wrong mail ballot. And that's where sometimes a double vote gets flagged. And you realize that it wasn't intentional, and it was just, somebody trying to participate in a situation. The other thing is when you start to talk about our elderly community, right? You have individuals who unfortunately suffer from, dementia or some type of mental issue that didn't realize they voted already by mail, and they show up at a polling location, and you go to intent. You talk to the local community. We had an issue in one of our communities, and we went to, it was a small town. We went to the local sheriff and said, hey, do you know this individual? And we got the background of them. It was well known. People knew. And so we said the intent wasn't there to prosecute. So those are some of the issues that you face.
Yeah, because close to half are resolved and closed with no criminal action taken against the person.
Because it wasn't intentional, right?
Yeah.
And you were able to prove that through the investigation process.
And then there's these cross-state double votes where, let's say, I'm registered to vote in Nevada today. I vote my mail ballot. Within the next 2 weeks, I move to California or Arizona and try and vote again there. How does that work when we're talking about crossing party lines or state lines?
That makes it a little bit harder, too. Again, it's making sure that we have the live evidence and that the evidence is real. But getting participation from the other jurisdictions can be challenging. There are a few cases that we're working on now where we require the participation of that other state. Again, that's where the ERIC system is really helpful and helping us put that evidence together to then go to that individual state. But you do have states, unfortunately, who look at this differently than we do. And one, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of responsibility, but that's not an excuse. We need to continue what we need to do to make sure people understand and trust the system.
The total number of cases referred for possible prosecution since 2020, 9 from the 2020 election, 5 from the 2022 election. So just to hit the nail on the head here, I mean, we're talking single-digit numbers. And then 6 cases that were investigated from the presidential preference primary. Only 2 of those are still open. We're talking numbers that you can count with your fingers in terms of how many of those cases are still possibly being prosecuted or still open.
Right. And I recently met with our civil investigators last week just to get a sense of how they were doing, but also to how the process was working and are there ways for us to improve the efficiency of it? And it was really fascinating to learn the approach that they're doing. The responsiveness of some of the filers, being surprised and shocked that they were so responsive and that they were taking this seriously. And that was really, really a proud moment for me to know that, hey, we're doing the job we're supposed to be doing, but we're taking this serious at the same time. And a lot of it, again, comes back to voter education, being able to educate the voter about the law and being able to have people understand that, hey, there are parameters that we need to follow as well. We just can't. We have to be extremely responsible in the process.
What can you say about once it leaves the Secretary of State's office, goes to the Attorney General or a district attorney? Have any of those cases been prosecuted or adjudicated? What can you say about those?
There have been. And again, I can't comment on the AG's process. They do the prosecution the way they do their prosecution, and that's outside my jurisdiction. And I am confident that the Attorney General takes this just as seriously as we do. I think you saw that a few months ago when we stood together and said, hey, we understand. We are going to be responsive, and we are going to do this.
Again, a very handy report with some great information. We'll put it in the show notes for people who want to take a little bit deeper dive into those numbers. But it's also a segue into a recent lawsuit that was filed against your office by the RNC and the Nevada GOP, alleging that voter registration rates in Clark County and Carson City were abnormally high and that the active voter count in some rural counties up here in northern Nevada was above 100%, and they say that this can lead to voter fraud. Your office, you came out with a pretty strong statement against that. What's your comment on that lawsuit from the RNC and Nevada GOP?
Again, it's active litigation, and we're in the process of it. But again, it's making sure that you truly are using data as intended. We can take data from different sectors, different areas, compare them, and say, hey, they don't match. But when you're not being truthful about the way you're using the data, that's a real problem.
I think you called it meritless. Is that how you guys see it?
Absolutely. And I think it's important, too, is when you look at the group of clerks that work in the state, Clark and Washoe clerks are appointed by their county commission. 15 of our clerks are elected. 13 of those 15 are Republican. One is nonpartisan by law, and one is a Democrat. And when you're suing individuals of your own party, that is a fascinating nuance in a lot of ways. These individuals are working hard every day. And when you start to put these pressures on them that are inaccurate or false, it doesn't help us get our job done the way we should be getting our job done. But I'm confident we will win that case, and we will show why we were right in the approach that we're taking.
Has there been a hearing scheduled yet, or
I'm not sure what the calendar is. We have numerous lawsuits
things going
outstanding that, managing the calendar can get complicated, and we're dealing with it every day.
we asked you this last time we had you on virtually. There was the issue in the presidential preference primary where people went back to look to confirm whether or not they had voted, and it mistakenly showed in the system that they had voted when in fact they had not. To reiterate again, your office is saying that issue has been resolved and it will not crop up again in June.
And again, that's the importance of the VREM system, is creating a unified system that takes all the data and is able to use that data in a uniform source. Right now, we have 17 systems, as we saw with Washoe County. Again, it's a legacy system that's not well supported, and transferring data from 17 systems into one, sometimes there is a bit of a cross in the amount of data or the coding of that data. And it comes down to simple coding as MB, which meant mail ballot. Some people use MB as, hey, this was a mail ballot that was mailed. Some counties used MB as a code to say, hey, this was a ballot that was received and processed as a mail ballot. Gotcha. And so when you cross-function all these different systems, especially systems that are no longer maintained by the vendor, you're going to get complications.
What would you say to a Nevada voter, maybe it's a nonpartisan who gets their ballot and doesn't see much on there that's of interest to them, or just a voter who's like, I don't want to vote. I don't want to participate in this election. What do you tell them?
That's unfortunate. I mean, if they're taking the time to actually look at it,
yeah,
they're halfway there, right? And I think the engagement piece is the most important part. But it's also, too, recognizing there's some people that can't vote. And so when you're not voting, think about the person that can't vote.
That's a great message to end on. But before we do end, I'll put you on the spot once again. What's something that our listeners or viewers, whether it's an election or voting related book or movie or an article you read, that might be of interest to them?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think it's not just an article or a book, but it's that human engagement, is recognizing that elections are about people. It's about the voters. It's about the candidate who's putting themselves out there to fight for their values. And it's about the election worker, poll worker. And the poll workers are unsung heroes of democracy because they give us that opportunity to have a voice and to execute our fundamental right to vote. And so recognizing that we need to bring back decency and we need to bring back respect. And when you walk into a polling location, know that that person's there to help you. And we need to thank our poll workers and recognize the work that they do.
Absolutely. It's work that often goes unnoticed and underappreciated. So thank you for that message, and best of luck as we move forward with this primary. Hope that it goes smoothly and we can have you back in the summer when we're gearing up for ballot questions and everything else.
Ready to go.
All right.
Thank you
so much, Cisco. Talk to you soon. If you made it to the end of this episode, I really appreciate it. If you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, anything at all, feel free to shoot us an email to bjmarjot, my last name, MARGIOTT, at sbgtv.com, and put Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. And if you have a minute, I'd really appreciate it if you left a rating and a review. We're really trying to get more reviews on the podcast, which will help it show up higher in searches so more people can discover the show. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.